Hey guys, so to start off our 3D element in our animation, we're going to begin over here in Illustrator and we're going to create a new After Effects composition that we will then sort of export and place into our master sort of background. So hopefully this will be a little easier to create some interesting designs here. So I'm going to create two different designs, and I'm going to create them on a single like kind of layer to just to show kind of how we build it, and then we're going to one by one put them on different layers here. So I'll start off. I'm going to continue on with the web large, but for the 3D thing, you could really make whatever it is you'd like. But obviously, if you make it in like the web large, you're going to want to keep it like, yeah, sure. We'll just make it the web large. Let's go ahead, great. All right. So with that 1920 by 1080, we can just sort of jump right into this. Basically, think about what it is you want to make, and think about when you were a kid. Well, when you were younger, and you were doing little cutout paper crafts and stuff. What you would do is you would get like the paper cutout, and you would have it, they would be all kind of connected and stuff. So for instance, I can show you this recent project I made here. You can see I have a bunch of layers over here, and essentially every little thing that I wanted to be kind of on its own little sort of facet. So the front of the car, the headlights, and the little area right here, all these various things, they were all just sort of made kind of as if they were like a cutout piece of paper, like a little cutout paper craft. You don't have to make anything nearly as complicated as this if you don't want. Obviously, go where your inspiration takes you if you think you have time. Basically, what you want to do for this is just create basically every little bit of your design inside Illustrator here. So I'm going to start off, for example, if we wanted to maybe make like a road sign, we could do a couple of things. We could use our shape tool here, and maybe, for instance, I could just I'll go to properties and stuff, and I'll make my fill be sort of a green like so, and I could just make like a rectangle here. And oftentimes the road signs are a little bit curved, and so just FYI, if you see these little sort of widgets here on the inside, we can just kind of grab these and kind of pull them inwards a little bit and sort of curve the edges. And then we can perhaps take our text tool and just click, say anywhere down here, and start. You'll fill this little filler text, and you can kind of go over here to find the this is like the general font sizes. So they're measured in points, and you can see like Main Street, and just pop this on here, and you can color the fill, various colors, like white if you want, and sort of pull this up. And if, for instance, you wanted to create like a border on the inside here, and just a fun little thing here, you can sort of select both of these, and you should see on this little thing, this little align right here. Usually it'll be set to like a selection right there. If you don't see that, you can just choose selection, which is basically everything we have selected. We can just sort of center them by clicking these little buttons here in the middle just to make sure they're centered. All right, so if I wanted to say, for instance, maybe copy this, like Alt and drag this away, and then change the fill to nothing, and the stroke to say white, and maybe make it a couple points bigger, and I can sort of then select this and hold down Shift and grab my sign from before, and then click my sign one more time, so that's sort of activated as the key object. Right here it says it's aligned to a key object. I can then center these together, and this little object on the outside, I can hold down Alt and Shift and sort of drag inwards a little bit here. Let me just zoom in some. Alt and drag inwards. Oops. So hold on Alt and Shift and shrink it down some. Maybe pull it outwards a little bit. You can hold down Alt and sort of drag these edges outwards towards the. There we go. And so we have this little thing. And I'll just click on this and make sure there's no stroke applied to that. So that's one thing we could do. Right, I'll take that stroke off. And I'm just going to select all this, and I'm just going to Control G, group it together. So whenever I click on it, any part of it, I'll just move the whole thing. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to hold down the Alt button and sort of drag this down some. And what I'll do here is I'll just get my text tool by clicking T on the keyboard, and I'll just maybe change this from Main Street to say 3rd Street or something like that. And I can then center this text with everything here. Let's double click on it, and that'll take us into what's called isolation mode, which will then, allow us to sort of select the various objects and center these together. Right. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to basically just ignore the, so to get out of isolation mode, just click on this gray bar at the top. I'm just going to completely ignore the curved edges because that's not really important. And I'm just going to kind of line these up, maybe say like right about like so. And I'm going to make a little rectangle to go between these. Make sure I don't have any stroke applied here. Do I hit A on the keyboard? Yeah, no stroke on this. So you hit A on the keyboard, it's the direct selection tool, which will allow you to select individual things even if they're grouped. That's this little white cursor here. So just to make sure it's just the same. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little rectangle that's going to go between these little lines here. And so just a little rectangle like so. And it'll be green. I might make it a little bit darker green, just slightly darker, just so I can kind of tell the difference. And I'm going to make another one. I'm going to sort of alt drag this one, and I can hold down shift while I do it to make sure it's lined up, and just sort of have that on the end here as well. And so this is just a little more complex than the cube, but it's the same idea. When we import this into Premiere or After Effects, we're going to want to just sort of adjust where the anchor points are, so they'll rotate on a certain axis, and we can then sort of manipulate their position in a 3D aspect here. Okay, so I'm going to just basically one by one grab these and put them on different layers. And as I do this, I'm going to rename the layers. So I'll just basically the two keystrokes you want to know are Control X, which is cut. I'll make a new layer here, and then Control F, which is not paste, but paste in place. If we just do Control V, it's going to paste somewhere just randomly, and I don't want that. I want Control F, the place where it was when I copied it, but it's going to be on a different layer. And so I'm just going to say 3rd Street, give it a name that you'll be able to recognize, 3rd Street, and then one by one, just take these out, Control X. New layer, Control F, Control X, Control F. I'll speed through this real quick. Okay, so I have these named a certain thing, and I'm going to have them. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just save this composition as its own little thing, and I'm going to call this signpost 3D, and we'll come back to this in a second. Okay, so that's the first little example that we'll see here. The next example is basically going to be similar but different. I'm going to do something, so for instance, this right here, you could have this kind of like, shall we say, maybe swiveling as something comes by or something like that. But there's different things we can use for this sort of effect here. So I'm going to go ahead and just close this out and make a new window, make a new one. Okay, for this next thing, this is going to be a little bit different because it's not going to be like a sort of just a random spinning thing. This is going to be something that's kind of happening in the distance here, or maybe even something that's happening in the foreground. But think in terms of like sort of simple shaped objects or how you might simplify something. For example, I think, I saw several folks doing stuff with water with their things. So I think I might do something that might appear like on the water in the background here. So let me just go ahead and get like my rectangle tool here, and I'm going to draw, say, for instance, a big cruise ship. With this just about done, I'll save this as a once again as a .ai file, and I'll import this into my shall we say, I'll import this into my After Effects here. But just remember, when you're naming the layers, make sure that each thing that's going to be its own side is going to be on its own layer here. So just keep that in mind as you go through building this up, and obviously keep in mind that like the more complex your shape, the more sides you're going to have to create. That little radar tower that I made was a little more complicated than I had bargained for, so I don't really necessarily advise that you do the bare minimum in terms of this. I do want something that actually has some depth to it, but do kind of keep in mind like the realities of like, you know, time constraints and like the, you know, constraints of the program we're using here. All right, so I'm gonna save this and close this out and open up After Effects. So I'll call this cruise ship. So we're here in After Effects, and we're going to just basically just create a new project, and we'll make a new composition, and we're just going to make that the same aspect ratio as before, 1920 by 1080, and make sure it's set to the same frame rate as before, and whatever timestamp you have for your main thing, make sure that it's the you know, the right you know, timestamp for the right time frame for whatever it is you had going on here. So I had one that was a minute long. I'll just make one that's like 20 seconds long here. And the background color obviously needs to be something that you can, like, you know, in this case, it's, you know, whatever the background color is, you know, just make sure it's easy to see what you're working with. So I'll just make it a little bit lighter here. Okay. So I'm going to import my sign here and just build that together. And once again, we want to make sure that we're setting it to composition, and we're setting the footage dimension to layer size. And I'll just grab my signpost here, and I'll just drag them all in. Well, actually, I'll drag them in one at a time, so I can kind of like one by one build it up. So I'll put 3rd Street here. So even though it looks pixelated here, it won't look pixelated, you know, at the normal resolution here, because it's set to be, you know, viewed at 1920 by 1080. So once again, when we're making these things, we want to make sure that we are basically utilizing the anchor points. That the anchor points need to be adjacent to whatever edge they're going to be turning on. So for instance, I get in really close here, and I grab this this guy here, and I get my anchor point tool. I want to make sure this is going to be as close to the center as between these two lines as possible. So I'm going to go through and just make sure that my anchor points are where they need to be. All right, that's about right. And I'll make sure that we have these make sure that we have these things tied into whatever sort of thing we wanted to have them tied into. I'm going to create a new shape layer on top of everything. So I'll just new shape layer. And I'm going to create a small little rectangle at the very top here, just so I can kind of see, you know, have something kind of being in the center, as it were. So let me just get my zoom in real close. So just take what you remember from your cube exercise, and you're just going to make this 3D in the same way you did before. So we're just going to highlight all of the layers here, and we're going to make sure they all have under like the mode here, make sure they're all lit up under 3D, and then just one by one start to you know, navigate how you're going to turn them and stuff. So I think this is going to be on the X layer here. Nope, on the Y layer. Looks like it's going backwards. So 90. Oh wait, back it up here. Okay, so make sure that everything that you've got is sort of linked to what it needs to be linked to. For instance, I'm going to have my main street kind of be the center of attention for the moment, and have this edge between be linked to Main Street, and the edge on the left be linked to Main Street as well. And, you know, obviously, so I'm just going to link, you know, obviously remember, you know, think about how things are going to be, you know, moving, and just link to the things that need to be linked to. I'm going to speed through this real quick. Okay, so the little shape layer up here, kind of made up. I'm going to sort of what we'll do is we'll just once again go through with the same motions that we did before with the 3D sign, with the 3D cube, make them all 3D, and with our sort of root object here kind of in place, what we'll do is we'll sort of use the rotation tools to kind of get everything to where we can see what is going on here. Let's get our Y rotation a little bit. Maybe our Z rotation down some. Or X rotation down over here. Okay. And one by one, I'm going to sort of grab these various objects and just rotate them the way that they should be rotated. So I'll speak through this again, just using the sort of kind of tools you used before when you did your when you did your cube. Just sort of rotate them the way that they, just experiment with each little rotation avenue. This one's going to be mostly 90 degrees, and I'll just go through each one of these here. Okay, so as you can see, once you have this sort of thing built, you've got a variety of options on how, like, especially depending on where your kind of rotation's gonna, like, where your anchor point is. So if I want to move this anchor point down, I can use my anchor point tool to sort of like move this more towards like the center, depending on where I wanted to have it rotate and stuff. So just make sure I have my shape layer here. Let's grab this guy and kind of drag him down a little bit, right about there or so, and I can sort of rotate him on like the y-axis and rotate him on the z-axis if I wanted to and stuff, all those various things depending on how you want to rotate it here. So kind of experiment with how it's going to rotate, and then you want to make sure all the motion that you've got is going to be inside this composition. So if you want it to spin as a car goes by, think about how it's going to be timed, and then just sort of so for instance, I'm going to have like 6 seconds pass, and then the car's going to zoom by, and so I'll just have it start the sort of Z rotation here. I want to say, so you go, Y rotation. Yeah, and I'll just sort of start this at 0, and then as it zooms by, I'll have it just turn from here to, say, maybe like over the course of like 2 seconds, I'll have it turn maybe like 2.5 times. So I'll have like maybe like two times, and then I'll put like 180 degrees here, and I could probably just ease those in and stuff. All right, so kind of imagine like, we're sitting here on a road, and then, as the thing's happening, and then something, then in my thing, the car goes by, and then, of course, it's going to go by from one side to the other. Make sure it makes sense, right? And so that'll be one thing you could do. Obviously, you could have it just sort of kind of sitting there, maybe like the wind's blowing it, and it's sort of like kind of going back and forth, like, like something like that. That's one thing you can do as well. So just kind of think about that, and that's again, like I said, one way of doing it. So we're just going to save this for now, and we'll come back to it in a second. And I'll save this as street sign 3D. Okay, we'll come back to this in just a second here. I'm going to close this out for now. Actually, I'm going to make a new project. New project. And same thing, new comp. And then I'm just going to speed run through building this boat, since it's the same deal. Okay, so I'm going to pause in building for just a second, just to kind of point something out. So I want this to be kind of flat, like, against, say, perpendicular to these shapes here. But at the moment, right now, I have it tied to everything, so if I try to rotate it, it would all sort of tie together. Everything would move together. So for the moment, I'm going to take this guy here, and I'm going to unlink him from that moment, because I have this guy linked, and I have this guy linked as well. So I'm going to unlink these two. So now when I move this guy on my Y rotation here, or rather my X rotation, I think, he's just going to move by himself. So I'm going to move him 90 degrees. And I'll make this 0. All right. So that way I can see that a little bit better. Okay, and I'll do the same thing in just a second. But for now, I'm gonna so I'll continue speaking through this as we go through. So. Okay, so I've got the chimney kind of set up here, and I've got my sides all kind of put together. The last thing I'm kind of left with is this little guy right here. Well, not quite last thing, but we'll get to that in a second. This little guy right here is kind of like hanging off there. Now you'll notice that when I try to rotate it, it's going to kind of go in different directions here. Let me make sure I have this left side not, or the right side not tied to the front here. I'll put the none for now. And so if I try to rotate it out, it's going to go kind of clockwise here, just, you know, the way it's facing us. Same thing goes for the Z rotation. Obviously the Y rotation, if I were to pull this back up to 0, would swing around front here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my anchor point tool and just drag my anchor point tool to the top here. Just again, this is just an idea of what you could do with this 3D effect here. And instead of using any of the rotation, I'm going to grab my orientation. So I got my Y, like I think X, Y, and Z orientation. So with this, I'm just going to tilt this forward a little bit there. So that'll like sort of orient that there. And then from there, I'll just make sure that everything is sort of linked to each other. So the right side is going to be linked to the front, and everything else is going to be linked. This will be my little master layer here. So any rotation I do with this guy is going to be kind of seen by all the other things here. So if I just were to try this again here, swing this around like this, so on and so forth and stuff, right? Okay, so this is fun the way it is. All right, so I'm going to sort of position this to where I can kind of get it to sort of normal. So I'm just going to do some experimenting with like how it's going to be, you know, kind of facing us, and I kind of have that hanging out here. That's about right. Okay, so my thought is that this boat is going to be coming in from, like, you know, over the ocean or whatever like that, and it's going to be coming in like head on, and it's going to make a little turn, and it's going to turn into you know, into us, into port. So I'm just going to have it oriented in such a way that it's going to be, you know, coming straight for us, and then it's going to turn, and then it's going to go the other direction here. So I'm going to do a couple different keyframes here as far as position goes. Let's see if I can pull this back to where it was. Here we go. Okay, good. All right, so I'll just start off with some rotation here. I'll have it go from the Y rotation. I'll start it here, and I'll give it a second, maybe like 2 seconds, and then I'll put the keyframe here, maybe like a half a second as it turns. Oops. Maybe not Y rotation, maybe Z rotation here, looks like. Yes, great, okay. And I'll just go over a little bit here. Z rotation to, say, like 0. And hey, why not Y rotation as well? Just to make sure it all kind of stays normal there. So from here, it's going to go, and I can even just sort of drag these over a little bit, just to give it like a couple seconds. And hey guys, so I've got this little composition that I made here. Basically, it's just, you know, I mean, right now it's very simple. I just kind of whipped this up just to show us how we can import the 3D compositions that we made just a little while ago. But essentially all this does is just, you know, it's just there. We've got the road, we've got the grass, and we've got, you know, the sea, and we've got this car kind of slowly coming by. I could probably even have it go by faster, but at this point it's fine. Essentially what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate our 2 different objects here. So this is supposed to be road, grass, sea, sky, sun. I know it's just a bunch of rectangles there, but okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to open up my sign here, my 3D sign. And I'll save this real quick. Call it sample 3D import. Okay, so once again, we have our little animation happening here, where this happens about 6 seconds in, because that's about the time my car comes in, or vice versa. So I have that animated there, and we can always tweak this later. So I'm going to go here to File. Let's go to, the way we're going to import this is by doing this. We're going to go to File, find Dependencies, and then hit Collect Files. And you want to make sure the following things are selected. You want to make sure that the collected source file, we're going to be choosing 4 selected comps. So you've got your composite right here selected, the one that's showing up here where all the action is. Make sure that that matches what you've got selected right here. So this right here is the comp 1. I've got comp 1 selected, so I'm making sure this is 4 selected comps. And leave generate report only, leave obey proxy settings, leave those unchecked, but check reduce project. That's just going to make it easier to import it. And when we say reveal collected projects in Explorer, that just means it's going to open just to show us what we've got. So I'm just going to click, and it's going to give me the option of saving it. Now I've already saved this this street sign composition, but I'm going to name it something just to show what happens here. Street sign import files, and I'll press save, and then that'll save, and it'll show me that I've got a report here, which is just, you know, kind of what it just tells you what it did and where it saved it to and stuff. The footage just has the layers on it and stuff. But as far as the street sign 3, this is what we're going to be importing in. So what we'll do is we'll go over to I'm going to find my cruise ship just to kind of get this done here. So I'll speed through this. I'll do the same thing here. So I'm going to go to... Okay, so we're back at our sort of sample comp here. So this is going to be your animation project, what we got going on. And we'll just double click and we'll just find that folder that you just created. So I've got my cruise ship 3D folder and my street sign import file. I could probably just shift select both of these and just press import. And I'll click on my, so this is my street sign here, and I'll double click again, and I'll get my cruise ship, and I'll get my cruise ship. Okay, and so essentially what we've got here, when we click on this little folder, we've got our comp, and then we've got the various layers here. We don't want to mess with the layers, but we just want the comp. And then we've got, so I think the easiest one to start off with would be the street sign, because all I'm going to do is scale it down. So the first thing I'll do with my street sign is I'm just going to drag in my comp, and I'm just going to decide where I want it to be. So I want obviously the street sign to be kind of hanging out here on the grass, so it's going to go on the layer beneath my Buick here. So if my Buick were to pass by, it's still going to be in front of it, so obviously that's not good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this down. So I'll just hit under my comp 1, S for scale, and I'm going to scale it down, say right about there, maybe a little bit bigger, then I can just sort of reposition it here. That's really good. And because I had already timed the animations from before, I can just have that the way it is, and as the car passes by, it starts to spin. All right, so that works out well. That kind of goes along well with it. So the same thing goes with the cruise ship. The cruise ship back there, what I'm going to do, I'll just drag in the comp. It's going to be behind everything, behind the all that stuff. So I'll just pull this back here, and what I'll do is I'll just once again probably scale it down slightly. Then I'll just, with my position, I'll just grab it and I'll just, oops, let's back it up here. Okay, I actually double clicked on it. So I'll have it hanging out back there. And it'll just sort of be hanging out here for now. And as you can see, when we start off this composition, it's going to sort of turn here, right? And we want it to start moving, so I'm going to actually put some keyframe positions as soon as it starts to move, right about here. I'll put some keyframes for its position. So position, I'll put keyframe here, and then maybe like way over this way, I'll have it be like maybe like 10 seconds later, I'll have it go all the way off the screen. So you can see that it's going to start to So we're here, and then we just see this boat sort of turn and start to go. I might even want this to start maybe this way here. Okay, so it starts to move. All right, and then it goes off. All right, and so in order to sort of convey like some motion from, you know, from coming in from far away, what I can do is I can use my scale, and I can click on my scale. I'll click a little keyframe there. Let me just first off click the keyframes and then go to U just to have both of them here. So I'll want this to be done right about here. So I'll put a keyframe there for 82%. And then back here, I'll just sort of scale it down. Oops, battery's running low. Gotta plug it in. Oh no, okay. And I'll make sure I get my anchor point tool matched up. So about there. And I'll make sure that's scale, so it's scale sort of centered on the boat. Oops, hold on, do that. That's fine. What I'll do is I'll just scale it down a little bit, maybe like to. So what we're going to be seeing is it's going to be sort of kind of coming in, and then it's going to turn, and it's going to go that way. And right, so essentially that's the basics of how we're going to be importing our 3D artifacts into our so sort of, it seems like it's a lot of steps, but really it's the easiest way to both design and then animate your 3D object in its own pre-comp, its own composition, and then incorporate it later, just so you can kind of concentrate and notice where it's going and make it look good before you put it into your composition. Because if you try to put it in your composition, you're gonna have a bunch of stuff in the background kind of distracting you from it. So all right, well, I cannot wait to see you guys produce, and I'll see you guys in class. Happy designing.